All right, my BIBLEin365 brothers and sisters, today we embark upon the book of 2 Corinthians. And folks, let me just tell you something. This book is absolutely no joke. Now, as I have said before, 2 Corinthians should really be 3rd Corinthians. 2 Corinthians should actually be 1 Corinthians, and 1 Corinthians should be the book anyway. You get what I'm saying. 1 Corinthians wasn't really 1 Corinthians because that was the second letter of Corinth that was written by Paul, and 2 Corinthians was really the 3rd letter. Do I sound confusing enough? Well, I did that on purpose. Anyway, these letters are extraordinarily valuable, and I'm going to tell you why they're valuable. First of all, a lot of questions were imposed by the church elders at Corinth to the Apostle Paul regarding a series of different issues that they were facing in the church at the time. And in 1 Corinthians, Paul appears to be answering all of those letters. Now, what happens in 2 Corinthians is a circumstance begins to arise that is very similar to that of the type of circumstance we are facing in today in the church. And that is the credibility of the leaders are being brought under question. And the enemy had a great and spectacular way of bringing in confusion into the camp that actually caused people to not trust certain people while embracing the words of others. And the words of others that they were embracing were those that shouldn't be embraced. And so it was kind of interesting because as false teachers were coming in and making accusations towards the Apostle Paul had an absolutely remarkable way of addressing it. And he did it by simply reiterating the fact that God had called him, talking about a very personal set of circumstances that he was facing with the suffering that he was dealing with the persecution that he was going through, and many of the things that he was actually suffering at the time. Now, I think that this is important for us because as the body of Christ, 2 Corinthians is critical for us to know in being able to understand not really what we would call the demographics of the Bible, but the psychographics of the Bible as it relates to somebody who really wants to serve the Lord. So here are the things that we learn in 2 Corinthians. And for us, these are the things I want you to hold fast to, right? I want you to get into this and look at what is the fake versus what is the real. And the best way you look at the fake versus the real is by simply familiarizing yourself with what actually is real. Now, what is real versus what's fake? The fake says that if you walk with God and if you're serving the Lord, then then life is going to be a walk through the park. Well, no, it's not, right? Reality is there's going to be suffering for serving the Lord, but that suffering brings about blessing, whether it be as internal peace within your heart. And, a lot of the crazy circumstances that we face from day to day oftentimes are indicative of the fact that God is doing something much bigger, which gives us reason to have peace in and of itself, because God takes the things that are bad and he turns it around for the good. So when we look at chapter 1, we are going to look at the fact that Paul suffered immensely. Folks, he suffered terribly. But here's a funny thing about him. He found comfort in his suffering. Like literally, in the fact that he suffered, there was a place of comfort for him because he knew that God was with him during that time. You know, it reminds me of the fact that when my daughter, especially my middle-aged daughter now, she's 2 years old, but she comes to me and she gets really, really upset because she got hurt. Maybe she tripped over something or she hurt her hand or got a little boo-boo and she's just overwhelmed. Or maybe she has a moment where she got really scared. I'm not saying that I like her going through that. I actually hate it when she goes through that stuff because I don't like seeing my children suffer. But there's something very special about me as her father getting to hold her really tight as she holds on to me and she's crying and her tears are falling upon me and she's finding comfort in her pain because she knows her father is holding her and embracing her. And I think that that's exactly what the Apostle Paul is expressing, that in the suffering that he's going through, he finds a peace in that he gets to understand that the God of all comfort, as he calls it, is the one that's there with him to help him through every thing that he could actually face. And that's the reality of the life we live. It's painful. If you're going to serve the Lord, you're going to find some pain. Even if you're not serving the Lord, you're going to find some pain. And that's the way it is. And so this brings us into the next theme that we have to really focus in on in 2 Corinthians, and that's the subject of discipline, right? The idea here is to understand what it means to experience true life, that the things that we call freedom in this world really are things that get us into a place of bondage. And the things that the world calls kind of a bondage really is freedom for us, because when we choose to discipline ourselves, to keep ourselves away from the evil and wicked influences that want to destroy us, we find lots and lots of peace. And then you're going to look at a theme of something that I like to call glory, right? God's glory in the execution of the ministry that he's given to you. And we're going to see that, right? We're going to see the fact that God is being glorified through the Apostle Paul, even through the suffering that he's going through. And it's a pretty amazing thing. He says that God has made them a competent minister, right, of a new covenant. That's what he calls it, right? And so this is a letter that does not come from this sort of mindset that's designed to just completely take people out. Rather, it's an idea that saves life. It doesn't kill. It doesn't take life. It saves life. And so that's the picture that he's writing here. And then he goes on to talking about the fact that his life was like a living sacrifice. And he begins to talk about so many of the things that he went through, whether it be directly or indirectly. And if you go through the book of Acts, you'll learn this. If you understand 2 Corinthians chapter 4, you're going to better be able to understand places like Acts chapter 9, Acts 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, when he goes before Felix and Festus. And there's so many other areas within his second and third missionary journeys that will give you a lot of insight with respect to how all of that works. And I think that it's going to be an absolutely fantastic study. So then Paul gets into this. What happens after I die? And some of you that might have that question are going to get it answered in 2 Corinthians. And then we start getting into some other things, like, for example, offering and what it means as the church is being helped by the giving of the church as a whole. We're going to also talk about Paul seeing heaven and what that's all about. And I had somebody come up to me recently and say, James, what do you think of the book that I bought you, where a person writes about heaven? I think the name of the book was Heaven is for Real. And my answer to them was, it was a great book. I used it as a wonderful drill stop. And of course, they were very, very offended by the fact that I said that. They said, you didn't even read the book? I said, why do I need to read the book? When I open up 2 Corinthians, Paul says that it was literally unlawful for him to be able to describe what it was that he saw. So why am I going to believe a guy that writes a big, massive book about what he saw in heaven when the Apostle Paul said, I can't even talk about it, right? So we get some really good insight and foundation into all of this. But here's the real reason why 2 Corinthians becomes valuable for us, guys. It becomes valuable because it teaches us several things. Number one, it teaches us you're going to run into a difficult time when you choose to stand up for righteousness. That's the first thing. The second thing is that's normal in God's kingdom. The third thing that we learn is that even though it happens and that it's normal, God uses it not only for his glory, but for your good. And number four, we find out that that's what brings us the source of life, peace, and comfort. God is sovereign. He's on the throne. He knows exactly what he's doing. And when Paul talks about the thorn in his side, I hope and pray it'll be a comfort to you, understanding that God allows us to go through all kinds of difficulties and ailments that he might be able to glorify himself literally through our lives. 2 Corinthians is an awesome one, folks. Listen, as usual, if you need more about this book, you can go to jamescadiz.com. You can go to the YouTube channel, many other places you can go to download my Bible studies that I do on 2 Corinthians for free. It's a very, very awesome book. I have some extensive teachings through it. God bless you guys. We love you. You are doing a great job. I cannot believe that we are at the end of August. God bless you guys.